want to express solidarity with all of our people made anxious or fearful by the virus, including our elderly and vulnerable. I want to express solidarity with our health workers and all of those working on the front lines. The Irish people have, in general, risen very well to the challenge posed by COVID-19. We see this in many, many different ways. We see it with our frontline workers in the health service. We see it with the tens of thousands of volunteers. We see it with the public support for measures such as the closure of schools and pubs and the embracing of social distancing. However, we are playing catch-up in terms of a health service which has been weakened by many years of government neglect. We see this in the fact at the start of the year that we have less than half the EU average in terms of intensive care unit beds. Now, nothing must stand in the way of our catch-up efforts, including the question of private profit. A two-tier health service is not the best way to meet a public health crisis. Beds in private hospitals will need to be requisitioned, I would say without compensation, and the private hospitals should be taken into public ownership and integrated into a single-tier public health service, providing the groundwork for an Irish NHS. I was sent to this House as a workers' representative, so I want to make some points about issues facing workers in this crisis. As the Dáil meets today, many workers are being forced to choose between feeding their families or paying the rent. This was an issue addressed by the Irish Congress of Trade Unions, Patricia King, today when she said, "A household with 2 adults and 1 child with a single income of between 45 to 50,000, i.e. close to average earnings for a full-time worker, could see a fall of nearly 2/3 in their net income, while a single worker with no children earning around 25,000 could see a fall of around half." Now, it doesn't have to be this way. In Norway on Monday, Parliament agreed that workers who are temporarily laid off will receive full pay for 20 days. Other countries have guaranteed 90%. And I support the call from Mandate and the Irish Congress of Trade Unions that there needs to be guarantees put in place for workers. I have submitted an amendment to instruct the Government to come back within a week with a workers' guarantee to guarantee incomes. 10 years ago, workers in Ireland bailed out the banks. Now we need a bailout for workers to protect incomes in this crisis. €203 job seekers is not sufficient. 305 sickness is an improvement, but it doesn't go far enough either. I understand the Minister is going to announce a temporary ban on evictions and a moratorium on rent increases. He needs to go further. Workers who lose their jobs must have their rents waived. They must feed their families and be under no pressure to pay that rent. The media tell us about the deaths in Italy, but very little about the strikes that are sweeping that country as workers demand proper protection in the workplace. A strike leader in Italy said this week, "Factory workers are not citizens for 24 hours minus 8. It is not tolerable that they see their everyday life protected and guaranteed by many rules, but once they have passed the entrance to the workplace, they are in a no-man's land." Count Corla, this week, many retail workers in this country felt they were living in a no-man's land. So too did many transport workers, post office workers, and many cleaners and others. Many of them have been left to fend for themselves without their employers providing sanitizer, providing gloves, providing the necessary protections. I think it is reckless not to now close down all non-essential industry, but until such time as that does happen, workers must be given the tools for proper protection in their jobs. I must mention the issue of the third-year student nurses in Cork. They are going to CUH and other hospitals to train 3 days a week next week. This will last for 6 weeks, followed by a fortnight's self-isolation. These students have part-time jobs, many of them in nursing homes. They will have to forgo these jobs and their incomes for health and safety reasons. This will hit the students who rent particularly hard. These students will receive a travel allowance but not a wage. Not all superheroes wear capes, but not all superheroes, it would seem, are getting paid either. These students must be paid. The legislation provides for the most drastic curtailment of civil liberties in living memory. Many will tolerate this, given that we are experiencing the most dramatic health crisis of recent times. They will do so on the strict condition that these curtailments end with the end of the crisis. For this reason, we have included an amendment which does not allow a government or a caretaker government to renew the legislation. If it's to be renewed, it must be renewed by a vote of the Dáil before being renewed. However, I myself will go one step further. I agree with the Council of Civil Liberties that governments in this country have a long tradition of using repressive legislation for purposes other than which it was intended. This has been seen many times with the Offences Against the State Act, which has been used not just against terrorism but against trade unionists, student activists and other campaigners. I am particularly concerned about the establishment of a full-time Garda Public Order unit, with one of its responsibilities, according to the RT website, being to, quote, deal with protests. In France and in other countries, COVID-19 emergency legislation has already been used to repress dissent. That must not happen here. For this reason, and I conclude on these points, while I support many of the provisions in the legislation, I am opposed to the package overall, and I want to register that point in today's debate. I will be putting the amendments as mentioned as well. I'll finish as I started, by expressing my admiration for and my faith in the ordinary people of this island to defeat the virus. I will stand with them and have no doubt that we will prevail on this issue.
Thank you, Deputy Barry. Now,